Well, full disclosure, had no plans on making a video on any substantive topic regarding the NBA, MLB, NFL, or otherwise for at least another couple of weeks before I made my channel's upcoming announcements. But this is an emergency. This is nothing like I have ever seen in my lifetime. Luka Doncic has been traded to the Los Angeles Lakers for Anthony Davis and some other pieces. Some other pieces obviously leaving Dallas as well. So let's talk about it. So I think it's important to start out by saying there are always two sides to every trade, and I am going to give you both sides. I'm going to try to give you as many details as I possibly can as to what's known right now, as to why this trade happened, how long it's been in the works, what's been going on, the reason the Mavs did it, the reason the Lakers did it, all that sort of thing. That way you guys can make your own personal decision as to whether you think it's a good trade or bad trade or an even trade, who won, who lost, regardless. So at the end, I will give you my personal opinion on it, but I do want to make sure you guys get every side of this because ultimately that's what hopefully most NBA fans want, right? Maybe there's a lot of people that want to just straight up jump on X, jump to conclusions, say, oh, whatever it is. I want to give you guys both sides. That's what I think is super important to have right now. Obviously, there is a consensus as to most people think who won and who lost the trade, but I don't want to just give you the consensus. I want to give you every side. So let's look at the trade details so far that we know. Luka Doncic was traded, obviously, along with Maxi Kleber and Markieff Morris. So they are going to be going to the Lakers. And in return, the Dallas Mavericks are going to be getting Anthony Davis, Max Christie, and that 2029 first-round pick that the Lakers have tried their very best to hang on to. Obviously, they use it in about as potent of a trade as they could have. I think if you're going to use that first-round pick in any trade, this one is the one that makes sense to me. But also, there is a third team involved in this. The Utah Jazz got Jalen Hood-Schifino and couple of late round second round picks this year, like late second round picks this year. So essentially, from what I understand, this portion of the trade was simply because the Lakers did not have the funds to be able to take Luka's full contract and Kleber's full contract and have the salaries match because they're above that luxury tax threshold where you have to match salaries. So they essentially just got rid of Jalen Hood-Schifino and sent them to the Jazz, who have some space to work with, along with a couple of second-round picks that the Lakers probably didn't really necessarily care about. So that's the way that it looks to me. That's what I have read on Twitter, and obviously ESPN, CBS Sports also reported on that. Not sure if it is necessarily in this article that they talk about the Jazz portion of this. Doesn't look like it, but let me see here. Just gonna make sure. Doesn't look like it. Yeah, it just kind of talks about what they received. So in this article, you're not going to be able to see it, but that's what the reporting is right now, is that it was just a salary dump sort of thing so that the salaries matched to make this trade kind of work. Now, from what has been reported and from what has been known and what Shams Charania has said, this trade sort of came out of nowhere. This wasn't something that's been in the work for months or years or something like that. The Mavericks weren't necessarily shopping Luka Doncic around. It looks like the Lakers and possibly one other team were the only two teams that were aware that Doncic was even available, because the Mavericks didn't necessarily call around. They didn't open up the auction, per se, for Luka Doncic in this one. The reasoning behind it is most likely because they had very specific players that they were targeting, that they wanted to get back for Luka Doncic, where, you know, sure, they could have called the Cavs, perhaps, but perhaps they didn't want a Donovan Mitchell or a Darius Garland or an Evan Mobley as the main piece of the trade. Now, the Cavs could be that other team. There hasn't really been much reporting on who that other team is. But let's just assume the Cavs were not. It's most likely because they didn't have any pieces that they felt would have made sense as a get back. Now, personally, I think that the Cavs would have made perfect sense if you were going to trade Doncic, if you were to receive something like Darius Garland and Evan Mobley, and you swap Doncic, and you still give up, the Cavs still give up a first round pick or 2 first round picks, whatever. That would have made sense to me. But obviously they went with the Lakers because they coveted Anthony Davis. And I don't blame the Mavericks at all for coveting Anthony Davis, because when he is healthy, he is a top 5 player in the NBA. I personally think he's ranked somewhere in the top 10 just because of that health worry that you have with him every game. You're always worried that he's going to get hurt. This year has been a little bit better than it has in the past, of course, which is great. Obviously, nobody wants to see Anthony Davis not play for 50 games or not play for 35 games, right? We all want to see the best players play as much as possible. And Doncic, on the other hand, has not been healthy this season. I believe he's only played in around 20 to 25 games, so he hasn't necessarily been available on a daily basis. There's obviously concerns about his conditioning, concerns about his health, and concerns on the Mavericks side, along with all of that, with his contract. He was eligible, no longer, for a Supermax extension somewhere in the range of $375 million this offseason. He didn't necessarily need to sign it this offseason, but he was eligible for it. So, if Dallas had these worries with Luka Doncic, and they thought that Luka either wasn't going to re-sign, and so they may get him for nothing, if that is the case. We don't know if that's the case, obviously, but if they had that worry, or if they were worried that Luka Doncic was not going to take the game seriously enough to keep himself in condition, to keep himself healthy, and also be that mature leader that we didn't necessarily see in the finals last year with him, then they probably felt that it was time to go. And they needed to target specific players to get back so that they continue to be successful. That is what it seems to be on the Mavericks side. That's what seems to be going on in the Dallas Mavericks front office. So you could take with that what you will. That seems to be the reporting. It even says right here that the Mavericks general manager, Nico Harrison, says that I believe defense wins championships. Obviously, this not only is a callback for how good of a all-defensive player Anthony Davis is, but also how bad of a defender Luka Doncic is, which anybody that watches the NBA knows. I'm not being mean. I'm not being facetious. I'm just telling you the truth. Luka Doncic is not a good defender. When he gives effort, he's not terrible on defense. When he gives effort, he's not horrible. I might even say he's not bad. He might even be somewhere around average if he actually gives us full effort on defense, like we saw parts of the postseason run last year when he was doing it. But 95% of the time, he's not giving his all on defense, whether that's a symptom of how much he's used on offense, or whether that's a part of the conditioning issues that I've talked about, whether that's a part of an effort issue. Regardless, that's just the way it is. He does not give his full effort on defense most of the time. So, that's the two sides of what Nico Harrison said, is defense wins championships. Therefore, we wanted to bring in Anthony Davis at the expense of Luka Doncic. Again, all that is what's going on the Mavericks side. Now let's look at the Lakers side. I think it's pretty easy to figure out why the Lakers made this trade. Because, objectively speaking, when healthy, Luka Doncic may not even necessarily be a top 5 player in basketball. He might be the very best player in basketball. I personally do not believe that to be the case. Right? Again, I'm going to sprinkle in some of my personal opinions here, and I'm going to wait till the very end to give my personal opinion on how this whole thing looks and what I think is good and bad about it. I'm just trying to give you all sides right now. But there is an argument to be made that when he is healthy, Luka Doncic is the very best basketball player in the world. Again, I do not think that's the case. I think it's Jokic, regardless. But he could be number 2 when he plays at his best. I don't think that's too much of a stretch to say. When Luka Doncic plays at his best, he is the second best basketball player walking earth today. That's an argument I am willing to make, or at the very least, I am willing to hear. Certainly, he's easily top 5, most likely top 3, possibly 2, and possibly 1. He's 25 years of age. He just took his team to the finals. And Anthony Davis, while fantastic, while excellent, while a huge part of the championship win you guys had in 2020 if you're the Lakers, is 31 years of age, so he is on the back portion of his prime. His injury concerns are always there. And, unless I am mistaken, his contract is going to be up fairly soon. And he's most likely going to want another contract. So perhaps you thought AD maybe not going to stick around. He did recently ask to be moved to the 4 so that the Lakers could get a pure, true 5, because Anthony Davis's true position is really a power forward. Although he's not as much as he used to be because he's not as good of an outside shooter as he once was. But Anthony Davis is a commodity that you are not really sure what you're going to be getting out of over the next few years. With all the injury history, with the degrading outside shot, possibly you don't know how he's going to progress, regress, whatever the case may be. Now, in Anthony Davis's defense, his skill set will most likely, not necessarily athletically, because the athletic portion of his skill set will diminish with age, of course, as it always does with everyone, unless you're LeBron for some reason. His skill set, his defensive versatility, his interior defense, his post presence will most likely not really regress with age, at least not as quickly as other attributes, right? So I'm going to give that in Anthony Davis's good column. In the bad column, he spent most of his 20s riddled with injury. I don't necessarily think his 30s are going to be any better. So if you're the Lakers, you're looking at it saying, yes, I love Anthony Davis. He was a huge part of our championship win in 2020, and at least internally, they believe he's the number 1 option in LA. That may be true, that may not be true. I've been trained to believe that LeBron is always a number 1 option, to be honest, and I know that LeBron has said that Anthony Davis needs to be the number 1 option, and that he is the number 1 option, and I haven't looked at the points per game that both guys are scoring. I would venture to guess it's right around identical, but I believe LeBron James is scoring around 28 points a night, and I'd be pretty surprised if Davis is at 28 points a night. He might be, to be fair. I haven't looked at the statistics, but it's not a clear-cut number 1 and number 2, I would say, personally. If LeBron James is still scoring 28 or 30 points a night, then unless Davis is scoring 35, which he's not, then there's no way that he's the clear-cut number 1 on court, no matter what they say. So maybe you're looking at it as, we wanted AD to be the number 1 guy. He hasn't been the number 1 guy, so we're going to go get a number 1 guy. And there is no better number 1 guy outside of Giannis or Jokic in the NBA than Luka Doncic. So if you're going to trade Anthony Davis, you need to get somebody back that's really, really good. I mean, this is like 2K stuff, right? Where you're just trading Anthony Davis for Luka Doncic because LOL memes. And it happened in real life. And again, for the Lakers, and again, the reporting is the Lakers did not call the Mavericks about Luka Doncic. The Mavericks called the Lakers about Luka Doncic, which blows my mind, but that's what happened. So I just imagine the Pelinka family just sitting there, or not the Pelinka family, the Bus family, really. The Bus family just sitting there in their offices or at their homes, right? And somebody gets a phone call from Mark Cuban or from Nico Harrison, whoever actually facilitated the trade. My guess is it's Nico Harrison. And they said, hey, do you want Luka Doncic? And of course the Lakers are like, yes. Because why would you not say yes? If you're the Lakers, this trade makes a ton of sense, because if you could get a top 5 player in the NBA who's 25 years of age, who can be the face of your franchise for the next 10 years, then you do that. That's what you do 100% of the time. I do not blame the Lakers for making this trade whatsoever. So, that's looking at it from the Lakers' perspective. Now, obviously, there's some other players in this trade, right? Maxi Kleber, Markieff Morris, two decent centers also going to the Lakers, so they get some depth at the center position. Not great depth at the center position, but some depth, which now they desperately need. And then Max Christie going to Dallas. I like Max Christie. He's stepped up quite a bit this year. He's had a lot of playing time for the Lakers. Had a 20-point night the other night for the Lakers as well. He's been in the starting lineup here and there. And unfortunately for him, he's going to about the worst team he could go to for his playing time and his development, because he's going to be blocked by like 5 guys, right? You obviously have Kyrie, who's going to now slide to the pure 1, where I believe he was really kind of the 2 with Luka, since Luka had the ball in his hands most of the time. Kyrie Irving was the de facto 2 guard in that lineup. Klay Thompson's been starting at the 3, but his real position is going to be a 2. So you kind of swap that and take that flip. Kyrie might be moving out of the 2, but somebody else is moving in. So you got Klay Thompson, Quentin Grimes, who has been averaging double digits off the bench for Dallas this season. He's a 2 as well. Dante Exum is kind of a backup 1, but really more of a backup 2, based on his size, based on his skill set. So he's going to be there as well. And there's just no real clear path for Max Christie to get as much playing time with the Mavericks as he has with the Lakers. Now, does that mean that it's not going to work out for him or for the Mavericks? No, I'm not saying that at all. Obviously, I would play Max Christie over Dante Exum. I don't know if I would play him over Quentin Grimes or Klay Thompson, but you can put Klay Thompson at the 3 sometimes. You could put Christie at the 2. You can maybe even put Christie at the 1. I don't know if I would necessarily do that very often, but you could put Christie at the 1 and have him run some backup point guard if that's something that you need. Obviously, I didn't even talk about J.J. Hardy either. Or not J.J. Hardy. Jaden Hardy. J.J. Hardy. Baseball mode. Good grief. Jaden Hardy, who is another guy who's a 2 for the Mavericks, that is young and wants more playing time. He's kind of in the same spot as Christie is. So, yeah, I don't know how good of a fit that's going to be. There could be other trades that happen as well. We don't know. But that's kind of where we are at with both sides of this. And then obviously the 2029 first-round pick, of course. Good pick for the Dallas Mavericks to get. My guess is it's not going to be nearly as valuable as it was if they sign Luka to a long-term contract, which if they don't sign Luka to a long-term contract and you basically traded, your first-round pick and Anthony Davis and Max Christie, who could be a decent part of your future, for 2 years of Luka Doncic, they may or may not win anything with him. LeBron leaves maybe after this season or after next season, and that's it. And by the way, who knows if LeBron's going to get traded too? That's been circulating around the rumor mill as well. So who knows what's going to happen. If you only get 2 years out of Luka Doncic, this is not a good trade for the Lakers. I'm just going to be frank with you. It's not a good trade for the Lakers no matter how you slice it, if Luka does not sign an extension. But I would guess that Luka is going to sign an extension with the Lakers, unless catastrophe strikes and he's just not healthy or he hates it in LA or whatever it is. He's going to most likely sign an extension, which means he's going to be on the team for the next 5 to 7 years minimum. So if he does do that, then that 2029 first-round pick is not going to be nearly as valuable as it may have been in a world where we imagined LeBron having already retired by 2029 and Anthony Davis possibly not being on the team anymore. And even if he is on the team, he would possibly be a very diminished version of himself. So most likely the team wasn't going to be very good in 2029. Now with Doncic, that floor has been risen quite a bit, because if you have at that time, 30-year-old-ish Luka Doncic, you're not going to be terrible. You're going to have one of the top 5 players in basketball. still at that time. Who knows? Maybe even number one. So your floor is not going to be 15 wins where you can get really high draft picks and rebuild that way. Your floor is going to be most likely 30 to 35 wins, and that's your absolute floor. Where if you put a bunch of poop around Luka Doncic, a bunch of terrible players, no supporting cast, you're still probably going to find a way to win 30 to 35 games because you have Luka. So if you put anything else around him, build anything around him at this point, you're still going to most likely be winning 40 to 45 games. You'll probably be a play-in team. If you pair him with another star who's actually good, you could win 50, 55 games, maybe even make a finals run like the Mavs did this past season. And then obviously, if you figure out a way to pair him with another generational star, then you've got something huge in the works if you are the Lakers. And that's something that can easily happen. It's the Lakers. They always seem to pull these kinds of things off. So that's both sides of it. The good and the bad, really, for both sides of it. So again, I hope that full breakdown made a lot of sense to you. I hope that that's what you guys are looking for. Now, I'm going to give you my personal opinion. Okay, so my personal opinion is probably in line with most people, but before I get into that, I really do want to hammer home just how bananas this trade is, because I know there's been a lot of hyperbole around this is the craziest trade of all time. I don't necessarily know if that's the case, because there were some crazy trades that happened in the 80s with like the Cleveland Cavaliers trading away millions of picks for nothing and all this stuff, or trading away their Hall of Fame talent for a bag of potato chips, basically. So there's been some wild trades that have happened. So I don't know if this is the craziest trade. Certainly it's the craziest trade and the most blockbuster NBA trade mid-season that I've seen in quite some time, maybe in my lifetime. So that is certainly the case, in my opinion. As for what makes it so crazy is it just came out of nowhere. I mean, I just watched the Royal Rumble. As you guys who watch the channel, I'm a big wrestling guy. I watched the Royal Rumble, came back in here in my office, just kind of hanging out, planning for a video that I'm going to be doing next week, just kind of with announcements and everything, playing a little bit of MLB The Show, watching a little TV, just kind of relaxing. I look down at my phone and I see the ESPN notification that Luka Doncic has been traded. And then I look on Twitter, and 3 minutes before that, Shams had tweeted that Luka Doncic has been traded. And at that point, people thought that his account had been hacked because it was so unbelievable that Luka would be traded that people thought, oh, well, this can't be a real thing. He had to have been hacked. He obviously wasn't hacked. So this is wild. I mean, this is one of the craziest things I've seen in any North American sport in my lifetime. It's wild. Now, as for who I think won the trade, lost the trade, what my actual opinion is. Again, I've given you guys every side, so you guys know that I know what I'm talking about here in terms of what's going on, why they did what they did. I understand that Dallas had concerns with Luka. I understand that the contract extension, they weren't sure if they wanted to pay him $375 million. I wasn't sure. I don't work for the Mavericks. They weren't sure if he was going to be willing to put in the conditioning and the effort really to be in condition, if he was going to mature into the leader that they wanted him to be. They weren't sure about his defense. I get all that. That all is fair enough, and I agree with a lot of those concerns also. However, players like Luka Doncic just do not come around very often. You just simply do not trade a 25-year-old superstar in their prime randomly in the middle of a season. That just doesn't ever happen. And there's a reason why that doesn't ever happen. It's because it's, quite frankly, objectively a dumb thing to do. If you were to have given me a list, or had me write a list, more accurately, of the top 5 most untouchable players in the NBA right now, at the beginning of the season, I most likely would have either put Luka at number 1 or number 2. The only reason I would put him at number 2 is because of how good Nikola Jokic is. But even then, Jokic doesn't have any help on his team right now, really. So if Denver got halfway through this season and they were the 7 seed, and Jokic was still putting up his normal 23, 24 points and 11 boards and 10 assists, but he had no help and there was no future for this, then I wouldn't agree with necessarily trading Jokic, but I would, at the very least, I'd be able to draw a logical line from one point to the other where maybe somebody does want to trade him to get a bunch of stuff back and just rebuild for the future because you won a championship and he's really the only piece you have to trade at that point if you are Denver, other than maybe Michael Porter Jr., who you're not going to get a crazy haul for. I could at least draw that logical line. Again, wouldn't agree with it, but I could draw the line. So in that instance, I would have put Luka at number 1. Giannis, to me, should not be untouchable, especially with how this season has gone for the Bucks. They've been mediocre. It's possible that Giannis does get traded at some point in the next year or two. Jason Tatum, while he is certainly untouchable, he is not, in my opinion, untouchable, as Luka Doncic. Shea, again, while untouchable, not as untouchable as Luka Doncic. In my opinion, again, if you were to give this to me at the start of the season, it's very possible Luka would have been number 1 on that untouchable list. The reason is because he's 25 years old, he's averaging 30 points a night, and he just, this past season, got done taking his team to the finals. Being the undisputed best player on his team in a finals run. That type of player does not come around very often. So, I don't particularly care, while I agree with a lot of the concerns, I don't particularly care about those concerns, because with superstars like Luka Doncic, you have to take the good with the bad. When the Cavaliers had LeBron James, more so the second time around than the first time, the good with LeBron was that he's possibly the best player to ever walk the earth. The bad with LeBron is that, well, sometimes he'd take plays off and not play defense. He was a bit hard to handle in terms of team leadership and rubbed a lot of players the wrong way and kind of held down a lot of your best players. And a lot of the good players that play with LeBron do not reach their full potential. And he had this thing where he just always wanted his friends on the team. Again, more so the second go-round than the first time. So, this is a very strange thing where those concerns with LeBron, people were just willing to say, hey, it's LeBron James. I mean, of course we're going to deal with all the problems that he may cause or any of those things because he's a superstar and because he's the best player on a championship team or a championship caliber team, right? Giannis kind of hasn't really gotten better in a few years. His outside shot has gotten worse. This year, he's a little bit better at the pull-up, at the 15-foot pull-up than he has been in previous years. So I will give him that. But you kind of know what you're getting out of Giannis. He's a bull in a china shop. He just runs straight forward, runs into you, draws a bunch of fouls, and that's really about it. And then defensively, he's obviously fantastic as well. So you have to deal with the play style issue that you get with Giannis. But you're willing to deal with that because he's Giannis, because he's a superstar. You're willing to deal with all of that. Shea, not the best outside shooter in the world, and really needs the ball in his hands quite a bit. And also, he's not particularly marketable quite yet, although he's getting there. You deal with all those because he's a superstar. Jason Tatum, he's very inconsistent at times, and in the playoffs, he hasn't always played at his best. He also tends to not be super consistent with an outside shot, and he tends to take some ill-advised step-back threes at times where it shouldn't really make sense. But you're willing to deal with all of that because he's a superstar and he's the best player on a championship-winning team. Nikola Jokic. Again, you guys see the pattern here. He's terrible at interior defense. Horrible at interior defense. He's an awful defender. One of the worst in the NBA, in my opinion. But you're willing to deal with it because he's a unicorn and he's maybe the best offensive player, especially at the big man position, that we've maybe ever seen. You're willing to deal with all of that. So, Luka, you should be willing to deal with the fact that he's not going to always be in supreme shape and that he's not that great of a defender because he's a superstar. That's what you deal with. Nobody is a perfect basketball player. Nobody has ever been a perfect basketball player. Even Michael Jordan struggled with a three-point shot, right? He wasn't a perfect basketball player. He was as close as we're probably ever going to get. Maybe LeBron, because in his prime, LeBron was averaging nearly a triple-double and was playing first-team all-defense. So maybe prime LeBron is about as close to a perfect basketball player as we're ever going to get. Maybe prime Jordan. But other than that, your superstars always have deficiencies. All of them. And you have to be willing to deal with them. You have to be willing to accept them because at the end of the day, you have a generationally good basketball player. And in my opinion, the Dallas Mavericks just traded away a generationally good player. And to me, that's just never a good idea unless you get a generationally good player back. If Anthony Davis was still 25, this would be a much more even trade and an easier trade for me to swallow if I'm the Dallas Mavericks. But he's not. He's had 10 years, 12 years of injury issues. And again, I've already said it at the top. When he's healthy, he's a top 5 player in the NBA. Absolutely, bar none. He's never won an MVP, but he has won a championship. And so as far as I'm concerned, when Anthony Davis retires a few years later, he will be enshrined into the Basketball Hall of Fame. And I don't particularly think that's a controversial thing to say. But if Luka Doncic retired today, he would also be in the Hall of Fame, despite the fact that he's only 25. Because he's just that good. So, to me, one first-round pick is not nearly enough. I'll put it into perspective. I get it that you're trading Anthony Davis, and he's worth a lot. But the New York Knicks, for Mikal Bridges, traded 6 first-round picks. And for Luka Doncic, again, I know you got AD, so I'm willing to accept that AD's worth 3 first-round picks. Equivalent, 3 first-round picks, maybe, in a trade. You got 1 first-round pick. So even then, even if you say Anthony Davis is worth 3 first-round picks, which I think is fair, given his age, given his injury issues, yada, yada, yada. You still are 2 first-round picks short than what Mikal Bridges went for. And I don't know if you're aware of this, guys. Mikal Bridges ain't Luka Doncic, and it ain't close. So, in my opinion, I think that while the grades of ESPN were a bit harsh. I don't necessarily think this is an F grade trade for the Mavericks. It's not that much higher. it's not. It's a D. It's a D plus. I don't even know if I'd give it the dignity of a C minus. I would probably say a D plus, because at the very least, you got Max Christie in a first round pick, so you got a nice young player and a draft pick, and you did get Anthony Davis. So you got some good pieces, and also we have to understand that may not be the only thing that they do. They may trade one of their two other centers and get somebody halfway decent, or maybe get some other draft capital that will help kind of further this trade along. But if they don't, then Anthony Davis will most likely slide to the 4, PJ Washington will slide to the 3, Klay Thompson will slide to the 2, and Kyrie Irving will slide to the 1. And that's not a horrible starting 5. Kyrie and AD as your two best players. I mean, there's a lot of teams that are worse than that, right? That's not a bad 1-2 punch. Not as good as Luka and Kyrie, of course, but it's pretty good. Your defense immediately just got way better, because now you've got still livelier Gafford coming off the bench to help with your interior defense. Anthony Davis is one of the best interior defenders in the entire NBA, and now he's playing at your 4. PJ Washington is obviously a really good player, a bit underrated in my opinion. And, you know, he's now going to be your 3. Klay Thompson's one of the best shooters of all time. He's going to be at your 2. So that's, you can live with that. And then your bench with Max Christie got a little bit deeper. Again, it's kind of hard for me to sit here and say, oh, I know exactly where he's going to fit, because they are really heavy on 2s. And maybe they'll trade some 2s, maybe trade away Jaden Hardy and a couple second-round picks to get somebody that's going to be a wing for you here in the future. Maybe like, I don't know. I can't even think of an example here that would make sense. Like maybe an Andrew Wiggins or something like that, if the salaries would work, or whatever it is. Somebody that can come off your bench and play and be that wing player for you. Whoever it is, whatever it happens, that's not a bad starting lineup. And I honestly could see that lineup in the playoffs being very, very dangerous, because you've got 2 excellent offensive players on your team in AD and Kyrie. Your defense is going to be way better than it was with Luka on the court. So therefore, I could actually see that team going back to the finals this year and going on a short-term really good run. But after that, it gets murky, because Kyrie's already 33, AD's already 31. These guys are on the back half of their primes. That's not to say that they're going to be bad next year or anything, but it's a short-term play, giving up a bunch of your face of your franchise for the next 15 years. Really, if you're the Mavs, you gave up the face of your franchise for the next 15 years to maybe be a little bit better in the short term. So to me, that you just don't ever do that. You always prioritize your present and your future over like right this very second. And by present and future, I mean not only right now, but 5 years from now and 10 years from now. Right now, they're going to be right about where they were at. Maybe a little bit better. And in 5 years, they're going to be infinitely worse. And that trade-off is just not worth it. It never is worth it when you do that. The only time players do that is when they are trading away draft capital to get good players, and the contracts may hurt them later on, and then those players regress, or they leave, or they get traded away, and then that team is bad, and they don't really necessarily have a lot of draft capital to rebuild. That's when that becomes worth it. But you don't trade your best player to get better mildly right now. You keep your best player, or you trade him to get way worse so that you can rebuild. This is just a weird middle of the road trade where the Mavericks are doing neither of those things. They are just saying we're going to be a little bit better this year and maybe next year and possibly 2 years from now, maybe if we're lucky, and a 36-year-old Kyrie Irving is just as good and Klay Thompson doesn't completely fall off a cliff, and maybe we hit on a draft pick or two and somebody else comes in and helps contribute. And PJ Washington doesn't leave, or Daniel Gafford doesn't leave, right? That's a hard thing for me to really wrap my mind around. So, again, my opinion is the Mavericks should not have done this. It seems a little bit dumb for them to have done this. Even with all the concerns, which I already said I agree with all those concerns, I do think that Luka has a conditioning and effort problem. I do think he has a defense problem, but I don't care because he's Luka. You don't just trade guys because they can't play defense. Unless they regress on offense too. So, flip it around, let's go to the Lakers. You do this a million times out of a million if you're the Lakers. If somebody calls you, by the way, again, Anthony Davis may be ticked off at the Lakers for trading him. I don't really think he should be, because what do you want the Lakers to do? They didn't call Dallas to trade Anthony Davis away for Luka. They were called, and I find it humorous. Maybe the call kind of went, "Hey, Lakers, we want Anthony Davis," and they're like, "No," and they're like, "Well, what if we gave you Luka?" And they're like, "Well, hang on now." Like, I really would love to have been in the room for that conversation, because I just want to see who broached who first. Like, obviously the Mavericks called the Lakers, but I wonder if they called and said, "Do you want Luka Doncic?" Or, "We want Anthony Davis." I wonder which one was like the opening line, right? Just because I think that the two reactions would be hysterical. In either direction, just for different reasons. But, okay. Again, if you're the Lakers, you do this a million times out of a million. It's not even a question. You trade Anthony Davis for Luka Doncic 100% of the time, regardless of Luka's issues. Because now LeBron does not have to work nearly as hard. LeBron does not have to have the ball in his hands a whole lot. Although I will say I've watched a few Lakers games. He doesn't typically have the ball in his hands the entire game anymore, which is great. But he doesn't have to work as hard now. Luka can be the main ball handler for the Mavericks. He's got an absolute alpha dog where LeBron doesn't even really have to do anything in the clutch now either, because you got Luka. So this is a guy that now is easily going to be considered either the best or second best player that LeBron has ever played with, because I think we all forget how good prime Dwayne Wade was before LeBron got there. Like, Dwayne Wade was the man in Miami. He was one of the best players in the NBA and a first ballot Hall of Famer for sure. So, other than him, Luka's going to be the best player that LeBron's ever played with. He's better than Kyrie. He's better than Kevin Love. He's better than Anthony Davis. He's better than all of them. Again, the only one that I'd be willing to have the conversation that he's not is prime Dwayne Wade, because they were two completely different players. Dwayne Wade's defense was astoundingly good, whereas Luka's is not. Luka obviously way better on offense. So again, there's that conversation that I'd be willing to have. Regardless, Luka immediately steps into, oh my goodness, LeBron with this guy is going to be ridiculous. Now, again, with all the trade circulations going around, it's possible LeBron gets traded, which if that's the case, then JJ Redick is probably going to be super ticked, right? Now maybe he won't be ticked depending on what he gets back for LeBron. But, I mean, where's LeBron going to go? Golden State? And if so, what Jonathan Kuminga and Andrew Wiggins and a few draft picks? JJ Redick's not going to be happy with that. Sure, he might be happy that he gets to coach Luka. That's nice. But also, again, Luka has attitude problems too. So, I don't know how happy JJ Redick would be if LeBron got traded, but let's assume he doesn't get traded, right? Is LeBron going to play past this year? I would venture probably yes, considering how well he's playing this year and how well his body's holding up and how good he still looks. Might play for another year or two. And then after that, who knows what happens with the Lakers? Because, again, the floor is they're not going to be able to get very many high draft picks. We'll see how Dalton Connect ends up progressing. What happens with Austin Reeves? Is Austin Reeves now shoppable? Is anybody else on this team shoppable? Right? I don't know. We'll see. Obviously, they already traded D'Angelo Russell away. So, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But again, if you're the Lakers, you do this a million times out of a million. I don't even really want to talk about the Jazz because, again, it was just basically a salary dump. Good for the Jazz. They get draft picks for free, basically, because who cares for them? So they have the worst record in basketball, I believe, or second worst, maybe. So, yeah, that's it, guys. That's my full trade breakdown. I know this was a long video. Thank you guys so much for sticking around. I really appreciate you hearing me out, hearing out my opinions. I hope you guys liked it, but regardless, did you agree with my assessment? Do you not agree with my assessment? By the way, I guess I didn't really give the grade. I mean, this is an A easily for the Lakers. Maybe even an A+, depending on how it turns out for them. So we'll see. But again, thank you guys so very much for joining me with this. I know I haven't posted in quite a while. There's going to be more announcements coming, okay? So if you are sticking around to the end of this video, just know that there are announcements coming later on this week or perhaps early next week. We will see. But regardless, thank you guys so much, and I will see you next time.